I'll write this as a completely new story, different language, Portuguese instead of French, per audience appetite for variety, different scheme, different sentimental object, first person male narrator over 60, addressing the audience by relationship, folks, you, implied father, grandfather figure talking to his community. Some men give a toast to start a celebration. I gave mine that night to start keeping score. Every word Priscilla's future in-laws said about my son, in a language they were dead certain I'd never understand. I was already filing away, one sentence at a time. Smile, Walter. Pour the wine. Nod along. Let them think you're just a tired old man who got lucky raising a good kid. That's what I told myself, sitting at that table at the Copper Barrel, the steakhouse out on Route 9. I'd booked 6 weeks in advance, because it had the right kind of dining room, dark wood, low light, a wall of windows looking out over the ridge. The kind of place that says we belong here without a single word spoken out loud. I wanted Fernanda's parents to feel like Callahan County wasn't some flyover, nothing between two real cities. I wanted my son Danny to look around that table and see his whole world getting along in one room. I didn't get that. I got something else, and it started with the bread basket. Is this artisan or from a bag? Rosa asked, holding a roll like it had insulted her personally. Her husband Tomas had a way of watching everything I did with the flat, patient expression of a man pricing out the room. Local bakery, I said. About 10 minutes from here. My late wife used to buy from them every Saturday. Rosa set the roll down like it needed a napkin under it just to touch her fingers. How charming. Small town things. She turned to me with a smile you'd give a child who'd just handed you a finger painting. And Danny tells us you were a mechanic. For how long? 31 years. I own the shop now. 3 bays, 4 guys working for me. How industrious, Rosa said, and turned back to her wine. Industrious. Like I'd told her I collect bottle caps. I let it go. Danny had his arm around Fernanda's chair, laughing at something she'd whispered to him, and that right there was worth every backhanded compliment these two could hand me over a plate of filet mignon. I've been broke. I buried my wife alone in a hospital hallway at 2 in the morning because we couldn't afford the private room, and I was too proud to ask my brother for a loan. I know how to eat condescension with a smile. You do it for the people you love. What I didn't expect was for them to think I couldn't hear the real thing. Hey folks, if you've found your way to this channel before, you already know how this goes. Get comfortable, because this one's going to take you somewhere. Drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from tonight. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this. Here's what nobody at that table knew about me. Not Danny, not Fernanda's parents, not even Fernanda, not really. Before I ever picked up a wrench for a living, I spent 6 years in the Navy, most of it stationed near Lisbon, working alongside a maintenance crew that didn't speak a word of English past yes and no. I didn't learn Portuguese in a classroom. I learned it the way you learn anything worth knowing, getting chewed out by a chief petty officer until every word made sense whether you wanted it to or not. I came home fluent, and then I came home quiet about it, because nobody in Callahan County cares if you can conjugate a verb in a language they've never heard spoken out loud. It never came up. Never mattered. Until it did. About halfway through the meal, Tomas leaned toward Rosa and said something low, fast, with a small dry laugh at the end of it. And Rosa, thinking she was perfectly safe, thinking the tired old mechanic across the table was just background noise at his own son's engagement dinner, answered him, in Portuguese, like flipping a switch. They think I'm furniture. I kept my face still. I kept cutting my steak, and I listened. They talked about Fernanda's dress first. Rosa called it bonito para algo de loja de departamento, pretty for something off a department store rack. Then Tomas did an impression of the way I'd pronounced bruschetta earlier, and Rosa laughed into her napkin. Small stuff. Cruel, but small. The kind of thing you let slide if you have to. Then Rosa's eyes drifted past my shoulder, toward the little display case near the hostess stand, where the restaurant kept a rotating showcase of work from local craftsmen, a habit of theirs, apparently. And there, lit under glass, was a photo of a rocking chair, my rocking chair. The one I'd spent 5 months building for my late wife, the year the chemo took her strength but not her stubbornness, out of a single piece of black walnut I'd been saving since before Danny was born. I'd hand-sanded every curve of that thing at 2 in the morning, because it was the only time my hands would stop shaking long enough to work. She sat in it every night that last year, and after she passed, I gave it to the restaurant on loan because I couldn't stand to look at it in my own living room anymore. Rosa tilted her head at the photo and said, quiet, amused, Probabilmente acho isso numa venda de garage. Americanos non tem gosto nenhum. So parafusum madeira barata e chamam de artesanato. He probably found it at a garage sale. Americans have no taste. They just bolt cheap wood together and call it craftsmanship. I set my fork down. Not hard, not a scene. Just down. Deliberate. The kind of quiet that if you knew me, you'd know meant something had shifted. She's talking about the chair I built for my wife while she was dying. She's talking about 5 months of my life like it's garbage somebody left at the curb. Nobody at the table noticed. Danny was refilling waters. Fernanda was checking her phone under the tablecloth, smiling at something. Rosa took a slow, satisfied sip of her wine like she'd just landed a punchline at a party where nobody else spoke her language. Except I did. I looked up. Tomas caught my eye first, just a glance, testing whether the old man had picked up on anything. I smiled at him. Easy, warm, the kind of smile that says everything's fine here. You know, I said in English, folding my napkin back into my lap, I've always thought the things a man builds with his own 2 hands say more about him than anything he could ever buy. Don't you agree, Tomas? Tomas blinked. Of course. Good, I said. I'd hate for anyone at this table to think I don't know the difference between something cheap and something that lasts. I let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. Long enough. Not too long. You have no idea what you just said in front of me, and I'm not going to tell you, not yet. That should have been the worst of it. It wasn't. 20 minutes later, dessert plates cleared. Rosa leaned toward Danny, not Tomas this time, Danny, and asked, casual as asking about the weather, Escritura está pronta? The paperwork, is it ready? Danny nodded, barely looking up from his coffee. Semana que vem, ocho. Next week, I think. I kept my face exactly where it was. Pleasant. Interested in nothing but my decaf. Paperwork. What paperwork? Ready for what? I didn't get the rest of it right then. That came later. In pieces. Over the following days. The way these things always do. But I got enough that night. I got a name. Alianza Capital Group. And I got a phrase from Tomas that turned my stomach in a way Rosa's comment about the chair never could. O pai é tão desesperado para ser aceito que vai assinar qualquer coisa. The father is so desperate for approval he'll sign anything. And then Fernanda, my son's fiancée, the woman who'd hugged me at Christmas and called me Mr. Walter with what I thought was real warmth in her voice, laughed. Actually laughed and said, "É por isso que funciona. Ele quer o Danny feliz. Custa o que custar. Ele é previsível. That's why it works. He wants Danny happy no matter what it costs. He's predictable." Then she switched back to English like flipping a light switch and squeezed Danny's hand across the table. "Having a good time, babe?" "The best," Danny said, and leaned over to kiss her cheek. "He's not marrying my son. He's performing marrying my son, and I just watched the rehearsal." I sat there with my coffee going cold, watching the young woman my boy was about to build a life with hold his hand with the same hand she'd just used to call his father predictable. And worse, to call him a means to an end. I still didn't fully understand. I wanted to stand up. Every part of me wanted to throw that napkin down and ask Tomas, in his own language, exactly what paperwork he was so eager to have ready. Don't. Not yet. Not here. Because here's a thing you learn the hard way as a father. If you blow up in a restaurant over something your son can't even hear, you're not the hero of that story. You're just the bitter, controlling old man who ruined his own kid's engagement dinner. Danny would defend Fernanda. He'd apologize to her parents on my behalf. And I'd have handed them exactly what they wanted, a reason to paint me as the problem before this thing had even started. So I smiled. I picked up the check, cash tip, the whole 9 yards, and I walked my son and his fiancée's parents out to the valet stand. I shook Tomas's hand. I told Rosa the evening had been wonderful, and I meant every word of it, in a way she won't understand until it's far too late to do anything about it. I got in my truck, a beat-up F-150 I've had since Danny was in diapers, and I sat in that parking lot for a long time before I turned the key. They think I'm a fool. They think this is already over. I thought about that rocking chair. I thought about 5 months of sanding by hand at 2 in the morning, and a stranger calling it garbage without knowing the man who built it was sitting 6 feet away, listening to every word. I thought about paperwork. I thought about previsible, predictable, and how it had been said about my own son like he was a line item on somebody's spreadsheet. And I made myself a promise right there in that parking lot, engine idling, hands on the wheel. I'm not going to say a word, not yet, but I am going to find out exactly what they think they're getting away with. And when I do, I'm going to let them explain it to me themselves, in whatever language they're most comfortable using. I drove home slow, the way I always do on nights when my head's too full to trust myself with a yellow light. Danny texted me before I even got in the door. "Dad, thank you for tonight. It meant everything that you tried so hard with them." I sat in my driveway and read that twice. He has no idea what I heard tonight, and it's going to break his heart when he finds out. But it's going to break a lot cleaner than whatever they've got planned for him. I texted back, "Anything for you, son. Get some sleep." Then I called an old Navy buddy, a man named Ray Delgado, who'd gone into corporate fraud investigation after he got out. The kind of guy who knew people who could pull a company's financials out from under a rock. It was almost midnight. He picked up on the second ring. "Chief, it's been years. Everything all right?" "No," I said. "I need a favor, and I need you to be very, very good at what you do." They thought the hardest part was already behind them. They thought all that was left was a signature. They had no idea I was about to become the paperwork. Give them exactly what they expect. A grateful, clueless old father who just wants his boy happy. That became my job for the next 3 weeks. Not a mechanic, not a father, an actor. The morning after the dinner, I called Danny before I'd even made coffee. "Hey, bud, I was thinking, why don't Tomas and Rosa stay out at the guest cottage for the rest of the week? Save them the drive back and forth from their hotel. Let them really see how we do things out here." There was a pause on the line. "Dad, you sure? I know last night was a lot for you." "It was more than you know, son. I want this family thing to work," I said. And every word of it was true, just not in the way he thought. "Let me do this." He got quiet, and I could hear the relief in it. "That would mean a lot. Thanks, Dad." I hung up and stood in my kitchen a second, looking out at the guest cottage across the yard, the same one I'd built with my own 2 hands the summer after my wife passed. Back when Danny was still young enough to hand me nails from a coffee can and call it helping. "You want a front row seat to my life? Fine. Come on in. Just remember, I can hear you from every room in this house, in every language you've got." Tomas and Rosa moved into the guest cottage that Thursday. Fernanda stayed at her own apartment in town, which was its own kind of relief, one less performance to manage under my own roof. For the better part of a week, I played my part like I'd rehearsed it my whole life. I asked Rosa about her garden back in Sao Paulo. I let Tomas correct my technique at the grill on a Sunday cookout, smoked brisket, hickory rolling off my old offset smoker while he stood there with a glass of wine telling me the meat needed a proper marinade. I nodded. I smiled. I said, "I'll have to try that sometime," while internally cataloging every syllable that came out of his mouth like evidence, because it was evidence. I just wasn't filing it in a courtroom yet. "You want to underestimate me? Good. That's the only weapon I need." Thursday night, after Tomas and Rosa turned in early jet lag, they claimed. Though I had a hunch it was something else keeping them tired, I sat in my truck in the driveway and called Ray back. "Talk to me," I said. "What'd you find?" Ray didn't waste time on pleasantries. Never did. "Walter, I've been doing this a long time. This one's ugly. Here we go." Alianza Capital, the import-export firm Tomas keeps bragging about, it's a shell, barely operational, filed for the Brazilian equivalent of restructuring almost 2 years ago and never recovered. There are liens stacked against the family property outside Sao Paulo, going back 3 years. Real numbers, Walter. Numbers that don't get fixed by selling off a wine collection. I gripped the wheel, staring at the dark windows of my own guest cottage like I could see straight through the walls. "And Fernanda?" Ray exhaled, and that told me before he even said it. She's got an active civil claim against her back home. Failed investment scheme, some kind of import venture that went south about 18 months ago, took a handful of investors down with her. Nothing criminal, but it's not nothing. And Danny? Does he know any of this? Not one word. There's more, Ray said. You mentioned they've been talking about some kind of post-nuptial trust arrangement. They're calling it estate planning. I'd bet my house it's not that. Sounds a lot more like a lifeline. If they can get access to your shop and the property it sits on through a joint trust, especially anything structured offshore, that's liquidity, that's collateral. That's a way to keep the whole thing from collapsing without anybody back home ever finding out how bad it got. I sat in the dark a long time after we hung up, letting it settle. They didn't fly 4,000 miles to welcome me into their family. They flew 4,000 miles because I own something they need. I thought about Danny's text. Thank you for trying so hard with them. Thinking his old man was the one who needed to prove himself. He has no idea he's the one being auditioned. And he has no idea for what. I didn't sleep much that night. The opportunity came that Sunday. I invited them to brunch on the back porch. Biscuits, sausage gravy, a proper cup of coffee. Tomas couldn't find a single thing to criticize. Walter, Tomas began, setting his cup down and sliding into that smooth, practiced charm of his. Danny tells us you own the land under your shop, and the 2 lots beside it as well. In our culture, family wealth is consolidated. Rosa and I are preparing a joint family trust through our estate attorneys, something to protect Danny and Fernanda long term. We would love for you to review it before the wedding. He didn't hand me a pen. He was probing to see if the old man would bite before he paid his lawyers to finalize anything. Family to family, Rosa added softly. It's how we protect our children. Well, that sounds real generous, I said, scratching my jaw like a man straining to grasp something too big for him. I fix transmissions for a living. I don't know the first thing about fancy trusts. Why don't you have your people send the draft straight to me? I'll take a look. I watched the glint of triumph flicker behind Tomas's eyes. He thought he'd baited the hook, and I was swimming right into the net. That night I sat alone in my study with that folder spread across the kitchen table, reading line after line of language that might as well have been Portuguese for how little sense it made to me. Terms like irrevocable trust structure. Terms like beneficial interest transfer. My eyes kept sliding right off the page. I can rebuild an engine blind with my eyes closed. I cannot make heads or tails of this. I almost didn't call. 31 years of handling my own contracts, my own bad breaks, there's a pride in that. A stubbornness. It doesn't like admitting when it's in over its head. But I thought about Danny signing something like this one day with a smile on his face, thinking it was a wedding gift. I picked up the phone at 10 p.m. and called Frank Delacroix, my attorney, a guy I'd used for every land dispute and shop lease since I opened my doors. Frank, it's Walter. Sorry for the hour. Walter calling after 9, this can't be good, Frank said, and I could hear him settling into a chair. What's going on? I can't make heads or tails of this offshore trust nonsense, I said, and I read him 3 lines straight off the page, slow, so he could follow. There was a long pause on his end, long enough that my stomach dropped before he said a word. Walter, Frank said, his voice dropping into that flat, dead serious tone he uses when somebody's about to commit a felony in broad daylight. This isn't a prenup. It's not a family gift. It's an offshore cross-collateralization agreement. 1. I gripped the phone tighter. Explain that in mechanics terms, Frank. They've structured it so your shop and the 2 lots act as the primary loan guarantor for Tomas's Brazilian entity. If his business defaults, which Ray's research says it's about to, the offshore lenders get an immediate, unappealable lien against your property. You're not giving Danny a trust fund, Walter. You're signing a confession that hands your life's work over to pay off their foreign debt. I sat back in my chair. There it is. I'm going to need everything you have, Frank said. Every document, tonight, if you can. You'll have it in 10 minutes, I said. I hung up and sat there in the quiet of my kitchen, and something in my chest went very, very still. They weren't trying to marry into my family. They were trying to buy it, and they were going to use my son's wedding day to do it. I thought about the rocking chair again. I thought about, he's predictable, and the father is so desperate for approval, and every small cruelty they'd let slip in a language they thought was a locked door. You didn't outsmart me. You just underestimated the wrong father. I didn't feel angry anymore, not the hot kind. What settled into me that night was colder than that, steadier. I'm not a mastermind. I'm just a man who knows when to ask for help. And now I've got it. The next morning I found Tomas on the back porch with his coffee. Same spot as always, looking out over my 2 acres like a man surveying land he already considered half his. Not yet, Tomas, not ever actually. But you don't know that yet. Morning, I said, sitting across from him. I read through that folder last night. He set his cup down, attentive now, that same practiced warmth sliding back onto his face. Honestly, it's a lot, I said, running a hand through what's left of my hair like a man genuinely overwhelmed. This sounds wonderful for Danny. I really do believe that. But I want to do this right. Let me have my own family attorney draft a clean, updated master agreement, something simple, something everybody can actually understand, and we sign it together, all of us, at the rehearsal dinner, in front of the whole family. I watched it land on his face. The flicker of surprise smoothed quickly into something like delight. That's a wonderful idea, Walter, Tomas said. And I'd have believed every word of it if I hadn't heard what I'd heard a week before. A signing in front of everyone. Very meaningful. You have no idea how meaningful. Rosa came out onto the porch just then, drawn by the warmth in her husband's voice, and when Tomas told her the plan, she actually clasped her hands together. Oh, Walter, this means so much to us. It means a lot to me too, I said, and that part, at least, was true. They believed it. I could see it in both their faces, the quiet, private triumph of two people who thought they'd successfully played an old fool right into signing away his own future. I could practically hear the math running behind Tomas's eyes. Days now. Just days, and the estate is saved. And nobody back home ever needs to know how close it came. Let them believe that. Let them pour themselves another glass of my wine and toast to it tonight. It's the last thing they're going to get to celebrate at my expense. The days between that porch conversation and the rehearsal dinner moved slow and fast all at once. Slow the way waiting always is, fast the way a countdown feels once you know exactly what's coming. Frank worked with me every evening, building the real story into something clean and undeniable, the liens, the lawsuit, the exact language buried in that trust that would have handed my land to a man across an ocean. Ray sent over documentation, translated, notarized, airtight. And every single day I still smiled across the table at Tomas. I still let Rosa correct the way I said brigado. I still let Fernanda hug me at the door and call me Mr. Walter, with that same easy warmth, like we were already family, like she hadn't sat at a dinner table 2 weeks earlier and called my son predictable to his own parents. Keep smiling, Fernanda. You've got no idea what's waiting for you. Danny, for his part, floated through those 2 weeks the happiest I'd seen him in years, picking out his groomsmen's ties, texting me pictures of centerpiece options like my opinion on flowers had ever mattered to anybody in his life. Dad, what do you think? White roses or the wildflower mix? I stared at that text a long time before I answered. Wildflowers. Because in about a week, son, I'm going to hand you back a life that's actually yours. And I want it to look like something that grew here, not something imported. Wildflowers, I texted back. Always. The rehearsal dinner was set for that Saturday. String lights ordered, the good china out, Tomas and Rosa sipping champagne on my dime, believing with everything in them that this was the night they finally won. Let them believe it. Let them raise their glasses. I've got a toast of my own coming. If you've stuck with me this far, drop your thoughts in the comments below. I always love hearing where you're all watching from. And hit that like button while you're at it, folks. It really does help this little channel of mine. They raised their glasses one last time that night, celebrating a victory that had never actually been theirs. Drink up. It's the last thing I'm buying you. The string lights went up across my back patio that Saturday evening, threading through the maple trees I'd planted the same year Danny was born. Long tables draped in white linen, wildflower centerpieces in old mason jars, 40 of our closest people laughing, passing plates of pulled pork and cornbread down the table like it was any other summer gathering. Except it wasn't. and I was the only one at that party who knew it. Tomas and Rosa held court near the head of the table, champagne flutes in hand, my champagne, from a case I'd bought specifically for that night, though not for the reason they thought. Rosa wore a cream dress that probably cost more than my first truck. Tomas had that same easy, patronizing smile he'd worn since the night we met, like he was doing all of us a favor just by showing up. 2 more hours, Tomas. Enjoy the view. I caught Rosa leaning toward Fernanda near the drink table, her voice low, her eyes flicking toward me across the yard. I wasn't close enough to catch all of it, not with the band warming up and 40 conversations going at once. But I didn't need to hear all of it. I'd heard enough of these two by now to fill in the rest, just from the shape of her mouth and the smug little tilt of her chin. Frank was there too, off to the side in a blazer, nursing a club soda, looking every bit like a family friend, and nothing like the man holding a folder in his car that was about to end two people's entire con. He caught my eye once, gave me the smallest nod. Ready when you are. I looked over at Danny. He was laughing with his college buddies near the dessert table, happier than I'd seen him in longer than I could remember. I'm sorry, son. I'm about to break your heart tonight. But I'd rather break it now than watch them break it slowly for the rest of your life, one lie at a time. I picked up my glass and tapped it once with my ring, the sound cutting clean through the noise of the party. Conversations dropped off one by one until the only sound left was the crickets starting up in the tree line. If everybody could give me just a minute, I said, standing at the head of the table. I promise I won't keep you from the pulled pork for long. That got a laugh. Good. Let them stay loose a little while longer. Most of you know me, I started. I don't love speeches. I'd rather be under a truck somewhere than up here, with all of you looking at me. Another easy laugh. Danny beamed at me from his seat, that same soft, grateful look he'd had since that first dinner. Thank you for trying so hard with them. I did try, son, just maybe not the way you think. But my boy's getting married in 2 weeks, I said. And I've spent every day since he was born trying to give him the kind of life where he never has to wonder if he's loved, where he never has to wonder if somebody's telling him the truth. I let that sit a second. My eyes moved briefly to Fernanda, still smiling, still holding her glass loose in one hand, still playing the part of a woman with absolutely nothing to hide. Not for long. I want to thank Tomas and Rosa, I said, turning toward them, raising my glass slightly in their direction, for coming all this way to be part of this family. That's not a small thing. Flying halfway around the world for people you barely know. Tomas dipped his head, gracious, practiced. The pleasure is entirely ours, Walter. I'm sure it is, I said. Something in my tone must have caught, because I saw Rosa's smile flicker. Just barely. Just at the edges, the way you notice a draft under a door you thought was sealed shut. Since our guests traveled all this way from Brazil, I said, turning to face the head of the table, my voice steady and easy, I thought it only right to thank them properly, in their own language. Especially since they've spent the last 3 weeks assuming I couldn't understand a single word of it. I looked directly at Tomas. The color started draining out of his face. Ja continuo, I said. The accent I'd buried for 35 years came out sharp and effortless. I watched Tomas's glass freeze halfway to his mouth. Rosa went entirely rigid. For 3 weeks, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet patio. You spoke about my son like a business transaction. You laughed at my work. You insulted my home. You called my boy predictable while you were plotting to steal my land. Fernanda scrambled in her chair, her face flushed. Mr. Walter. Fernanda, I said, cold as steel. Sit down. I turned back to the room and switched seamlessly to English. I heard every single word. The words hit the table like a dropped plate. 40 faces turned first toward Tomas and Rosa, then toward me, then slowly toward Danny, whose face had gone from confusion to something else entirely. Something breaking. Dad, he started, voice small. What? I'm sorry, son, I said, and I meant it more than I'd meant anything in a long time. I didn't want you to find out like this, but I couldn't let you find out after the wedding either. I reached down beside my chair and picked up the folder Frank had brought, the same kind of leather folder Tomas had slid across my porch table 2 weeks earlier, except this one didn't have a single lie inside it. 2 weeks ago, I said, laying it open on the table for everyone to see. Tomas and Rosa asked me to sign a family trust. They called it estate planning. A gift, they said. A way to welcome us into the family properly. I flipped to the first page. What it actually was a transfer of my shop and my land into an offshore holding entity controlled entirely by Tomas Alves. Gasps down the table now. One of Danny's groomsmen covered his mouth. Tomas's company back in Brazil is a shell, I said, flipping another page. It's been collapsing for 2 years. There are liens against his estate going back further than that. And Fernanda, I looked at her now, steady, no anger in my voice, just fact after fact after fact has an active civil claim against her in Brazil. For a failed investment scheme she never once mentioned to the man she's supposed to be marrying in 14 days. That's not, Fernanda started, half rising from her chair. I'm not finished, I said, and something in my voice made her sit back down. Danny stared at Fernanda now, really waiting. The way you wait for someone to prove you wrong about the worst thing you've ever let yourself think about them. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Danny, it's not what it looks like. He cut her off, and his voice when it came was calmer than I expected, colder than I'd ever heard from him. You called my dad predictable, he said. You laughed about the chair he built for my mom. You made me a pawn in your family's scheme. He reached down, slow and deliberate, and pulled the ring off his own finger, set it down on Fernanda's plate, right next to her untouched brisket. I was going to spend my life with you, he said, and you were going to spend yours robbing my father. He stood, and instead of turning toward his friends, instead of running the way anybody might have forgiven him for doing, he walked around the table to where I was standing. He didn't hide behind me. He stood beside me, shoulder to shoulder. That's my boy. I turned back to Tomas, who still hadn't found his footing, his wife on one side gone pale and silent, cornered by their own words coming back to them in a language they'd never once imagined would betray them. I handed Tomas a second document from the folder. Not the trust this time. That's an itemized invoice. I said, for every expense your family's accrued during your stay in my guest cottage, and a formal notice you'll need to vacate my property by tomorrow morning. Tomas found his voice first, thin and brittle. Walter, surely we can discuss. We discussed plenty, I said. In 2 languages, apparently. I just didn't join in until now. I picked up my champagne glass, took a slow sip, savoring it, then set it back down on the table with a small, deliberate click. Oh, and Tomas, I said, I paid for tonight out of my own pocket, the same pocket I fill fixing transmissions. I'd say you're welcome, but we both know you don't mean it when you say thank you. I gestured toward the driveway, toward the guest cottage, lit up gold across the yard, the same one I'd built with my own 2 hands, the same summer as that chair. Cottage is unlocked, I said. You're welcome to stay there tonight, but I'd recommend calling a hotel instead. The breakfast is better. Nobody at that table said a word. Tomas's jaw worked like he wanted to argue, wanted to salvage something, anything, out of the wreckage. But there was nothing left to salvage. Not with a folder full of documentation sitting open on the table. Not with his own words handed back to him in the very language he thought had made him untouchable. I looked down at Danny. He looked up at me, tears standing in his eyes, but his jaw set, steady. You ready? I asked him, quiet. Just for us. He nodded. Together we walked away from that table, past the string lights, past the wildflowers in their mason jars, past 40 stunned faces, and 1 folder that had just ended a con. 2 people flew 4,000 miles to pull off. Behind us, I heard Rosa's voice crack high and desperate, calling after us, words I didn't bother turning around to catch, in English or Portuguese. It didn't matter anymore. I'd heard everything I needed to hear from that family the first night, over filet mignon and a rocking chair, thinking I couldn't understand a word of it. You were wrong about a lot of things, Tomas. But you were most wrong about this, thinking a tired old man with grease under his fingernails wouldn't know exactly what to do with the truth once he finally had it. Danny slipped his hand into mine as we walked toward the house, the same way he used to when he was small enough to hand me nails from a coffee can and call it helping. Thank you, Dad, he said quietly, for hearing what I couldn't. Always, son, I said, every single word. Behind us, the string lights kept glowing over an empty toast, and a family that had crossed an ocean to take something from us and left instead with nothing but the sound of their own words, finally understood. If this one hit home for you folks, go ahead and hit that like button, drop a comment, and let me know where you're watching from tonight. I'll see you all in the next one.